Good morning, and greetings to those of you who are not in the Japan morning time zone. My name is Vicky Bayer. I'm a professor of law at Hitotsubashi University and kanji here at the FCCJ, and I will be moderating today's session. We're very excited to be able to do this session with four very distinguished panelists, three here in the room with us and one who is joining online. We're here today to talk about Japanese traditional crafts and whether they can survive in our modern 21st century world. The high quality of Japan's craftsmanship is renowned throughout the world. In the area of koge crafts, items that are both functional and artistic, they often involve very complicated processes that require years to learn and master. Becoming involved in their production is a lifetime commitment. There are at least 200 different crafts that are recognized as koge crafts, but some seem to be dying out with the master craftspeople aging and no younger people learning the processes. Today we want to explore that situation, including the reasons for it and what might be done to prevent the complete loss of these skills and technologies. Joining me in the exploration, we have four distinguished panelists, as I mentioned. Let me introduce all four of them to you now, assuming I know how to make the slides work. There we are. Steve Beimel is a native Californian who's been involved with the Japanese culture in various ways since the early 1970s. He's the founder of Japan Craft 21, an organization which helps to identify viable but vulnerable traditional Japanese crafts and to assist in their revitalization. His organization recently helped establish Shinmachiya-juku, a free-of-charge school in Kyoto that teaches wood joinery construction and other advanced traditional building skills to working tradespeople, basically helping them expand their building repertoire. In collaboration with the Asia Society Tokyo Center, Japan Craft 21 has started the Japan Traditional Craft Revitalization Contest, the first winners of which were announced just last week. Amy Katoh arrived in Japan from Boston after graduating from college in 1962. After living in Geneva and London and Mexico, she has made her life in Tokyo with her husband Yuichi and four children. She has worked for CNN, written books, worked for CNN, and started Blue and White, her well-known boutique in Azabu-Juban. Amy travels throughout Japan in search of craftspeople and their work that she can share with the world. Sachiko Matsuyama is a social entrepreneur whose domain is Japan's craft culture. After being a storyteller of craft culture for several years, she established a company called Perspective 2 years ago with a fourth-generation urushi lacquerware refiner in an effort to revitalize the craft culture of Japan. One of their projects is called Koge no Mori, or Craft Forest, a cradle-to-cradle approach to traditional craft production that includes planting, cultivating, harvesting, making, using, and mending. I did want to mention in this photograph, you can see that Amy is planting a tree, a urushi tree with a couple of children, and the lower photograph is actually a lacquerware surfboard, for those of you who are wondering about the sun worshiper in that photograph. In restoring this cycle of practices, Amy and her colleagues are creating an ecosystem for people, tools, and skills connected to each of the practices they're focusing on, which will ensure that these practices can be passed to the next generation. Sachiko is also a co-founder of Perspective 2019, a research affiliate of Kyoto Seika University. And our last speaker is Allan. I shouldn't say last speaker because we expect our speakers to be having a conversation today, so nobody is first or last. The last one to be introduced is Allan West. When he was a teenager, Allan West thought he had discovered a new method of creating paint by using a mixture of protein and pigment. He was later disappointed to learn that the process he thought he had invented already existed in Japan, but he recovered from his disappointment by moving to Japan at the age of 19 to learn more about this traditional painting technique. Mr. West ultimately earned a Master's of Fine Arts from the Tokyo University of the Arts, studying under nihonga master Kayama Matazo. Mr. West has gone on to become a well-known nihonga artist in his own right, continuing to make his own paints in the traditional way. His preference is to work on folding screens and hanging scrolls. He's exhibited in over 35 museums around the world and specializes in the use of gold and silver leaf for the creation of commissioned work to order. So those are our speakers for today. And now I have to figure out how I stop this. There we are. Okay. So I'd like to begin our discussion today to just define our terms. We're talking about traditional crafts in Japan, but there are a lot of different kinds of crafts. So I want to ask each of our speakers to share with us the types of crafts they believe are endangered and tell us what makes those crafts particularly valuable, especially in our 21st century. Amy, perhaps we can start with you.
I think almost all of them are in danger right now because, as you said, the people are getting older and the next generation is not excited about following in an old traditional craft. So I see that happen a lot in the areas that I'm involved in, which is dyeing, yukata dyeing, indigo dyeing. Although in indigo dyeing there seems to be more vitality. Young people are fascinated with indigo, and there's a mystique about indigo that people are taking up. So that is very encouraging to me. I think ceramics are also, they're an individualistic thing, I think. So in many cases, the sun will go off in another direction. It's just a very worrying thing. I always, when I meet a new craftsman, I try to find out if they have children and if the children are interested in what they're doing, because it is something that is more easily transmitted to the child rather than to a new deshi. But it's just something that needs all the cheerleading that it can get, I think, to get people to be interested in doing this mendokusai, annoying, bothersome thing. It's much easier to go on into IT or some of the modern things. So we have a job to do.
Okay. Steve, would you like to share with us what you see in this, what you see as the endangered points?
Sure. I spent the last 30 years in the tour business and organizing tours, leading tours. And in that process, I met craftspeople from all over Japan. So actually the last 50 years in Japan, as Vicky mentioned. So I got to see Japan in 1971, which had a rich tradition, a live, vibrant tradition. And I saw that decrease and decrease and decrease to the point where, at this point, let's just say in the 70s, there were 300,000 recognized Japanese craftspeople who were certified craftspeople by the government. And now that number went from 300,000 to about 50,000. And most of those people are in their 50s, 60s, and 70s or beyond. So of course, of the 200 crafts, many are in danger. And what I've been focusing on recently mostly would be crafts such as joinery, lacquer, textiles, ceramics, bamboo, etc. And they're all these fields are really in peril of disappearing, I'd say, within the next 5 years.
Well, that's cheerful.
Well, we plan to end on a very happy note, by the way.
Good, something to look forward to. Sachiko, what can you add here?
Well, like Stephen and Amy mentioned, many types of Japanese traditional craft is endangered, but I'm more worried about the types of a traditional craft that's based on the ecosystem of the people who maintains the industry, which to me, particularly I'm focused on urushi natural lacquer, and also I'm concerned about the textile industry as well. I thought about the ecosystem, and in which I mean this kind of ecosystem is made with people who had certain skills and also tools and materials. And the complexity of this ecosystem has been, available to this time to the Japanese traditional craft to keep this type of technique in this era. But once this balance of the ecosystem has been lost, then we will not recover the skills of the people. And I'm particularly working with urushi lacquer. And if I speak about the fact in urushi lacquer, 2,000 tons of urushi was consumed in Edo period, like 200 years ago. But 40 years ago, it was 500 tons. In 2018, it was 36 tons. And it's being said that in 2019, it's only like 30 tons that was consumed. That is the fact.
So quite a precipitous drop in the use of this product.
Yes.
Okay. And I believe Allan has joined us online. There he is. Can you take yourself off mute and also give us your input on the types of crafts and how you see them being endangered? I think you're still on mute, Allan.
Oh, let me see here. I'm going to do my best.
There you
here
go. You're good.
Okay, good. So as a nihonga artist, I also really rely a lot on craftspersons. For instance, the urushi for my frame and other things like that. My experience has been quite interesting. In the 90s, it was really scary to see how many people were leaving the traditional crafts to, work for large international corporations and things like that because it was so cool. And yet it's been a generation since then already. And my experience has been that the traditional crafts have gained a kind of exoticism that they didn't before. That in a lot of ways, people, the younger people growing up in highly westernized situations have found these traditional crafts to be quite unusual, remarkable, and appealing in a way that it wasn't in the 90s, 80s, and 90s. And I find that quite encouraging, actually.
So could you maybe expand a little bit on what you're seeing in terms of that resurgence, if I can use that word, resurgence?
Well, I mean, I think Matsuyama-san is a great example of that in that they're really starting to find new outlets for their creativity and for the kind of techniques that have been handed down to them, like the surfboard. I mean, I think that's just fantastic example of the kind of freedom that this new generation is really kind of pioneering. In that respect, I find it exciting and encouraging to see how perhaps this comes from the older generation feeling like we should give them much more free rein and license to do whatever they want to in a way that they hadn't earlier too. But I suspect a lot of that comes from their, Matsuyama-san and others having a very strong feeling and attitude that if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it on my own terms. And I really appreciate that.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I realized as I was listening to our speakers answer the questions that I neglected to mention that since we do hope that today's presentation will be largely a conversation among our speakers, we're not asking people to hold their questions until the very end. If you have questions, I invite you to use, those of you online, please use the Zoom chat function and state your questions in English, please. I read Japanese very slowly. And state your questions in the chat function, and I will try to pose them to our speakers as soon as there's a break in the conversation where I can do that. Those of you in the room, obviously, please just raise your hand and we'll get to your questions. I hope you're teasing me. Sorry?
No, I wanted to say something.
Oh, good. I'll let you. So I just wanted to mention that quickly because I neglected to do that before. And I actually had a follow-up question to pose, but it looks like our speakers are off and running. So Steve, please.
So I wanted to follow up on something that Sachiko had said. First of all, I wanted to mention that in our contest, we had a national contest, and we had 154 contestants. And many of them, I'd say most of them, really exhibited what Allan just said. The young people who have ideas, they want to try things, they want to do things, a lot of energy. And our grand prize winner is Sachiko and her partner, Tsutsumi Takuya-san. So they are our grand prize winner. So just a little.
Bravo.
I would like to just reiterate something really important that Sachiko-san said about the ecosystem. To make one obi, one obi sash for a kimono, it takes up to 15 different workshops working in collaboration. And if one of those people goes out of business, the whole system could implode. And so many of the crafts are based on that kind of ecosystem, that basic cooperative effort.
Can it ever, Steve, be simplified so that, like, there's an indigo dyer in Tokushima called Buaiso, which is a very aggressive group of young men.
Assertive.
Assertive.
Yes.
That's it. Aggressive is not the right word. But they're trying to do the whole process by themselves.
Yes.
And I don't know. I admire their energy and their assertiveness, but I don't think it's true with an obi that you can do that. But I wonder if there's any way of streamlining crafts.
First of all, the Buaiso people in Kyushu are extraordinary in the fact that they are doing everything themselves.
Absolutely.
From seed to sales, everything in between. Extraordinary. There are a number of people. In fact, we had several people, and one of our 10 Awards of Excellence winners is doing exactly that. This person, she has gathered together, Takemi-san has gathered together a number of fine craftspeople, really high-level craftspeople who are working in various places in Kyoto, and she's put them in one room together, and they're teaching each other, and they're bringing in young people to try and keep this going. Another one of our contestants, also in the kimono business, has a room where she has, she has again people from that whole chain of workers craftspeople coming together to do it under one roof.
That's
so
good.
This is maybe this is 1 or 2% of what's going on, but it's a great trend towards the future.
Good direction.
Our proposal as well.
Oh,
It's
absolutely.
about reformatting ecosystem of the urushi industry, which includes urushi refiner, urushi painter, and also woodworkers for making the base for urushi lacquerware, like joinery worker and wood turners as well. And also we plant urushi trees as well.
Yes.
Sachiko-san's project was so all-encompassing that they really stood out. We had great applicants, but your project involves rural revitalization, building a craft community, urushi, what is it, 96% comes from overseas? You know, and whereas Japan has a lot of land and a lot of forests, Japan could be growing its own urushi. And for me, to be able to have the raw materials here in the country, that's part of the chain. It's not just making things. It's part of the culture. It's a part of the attitude. It's and your project covered so many aspects, which was fantastic.
Actually, if I can be a little bit provocative there, Steve, you said that you feel like these production, the stages of production, having the capability domestically to have each of those stages of production is an important part of the culture. And yet, as you mentioned, some things are now being imported,
Yes.
presumably because of our basic capitalist economics, that they can be produced more cheaply
Yes.
overseas and imported more cheaply. And if we can do that, given that that is the current economic trend, to have things produced where they are most economically efficient to be produced, what's the danger of allowing that market force to run its course?
Is this for,
Please,
okay.
yeah, well, for whoever wishes to challenge the question.
If you don't mind. So I think for me, Koge, master crafts of Japan are more than just making things. It's more than consumerism. In my neighborhood in Kyoto, it seems like every fifth house, there's someone who's making something. There are people, there's a man who makes Buddhist altars. There are people involved in dyeing, in weaving, in all aspects of crafts. And they're all, older people now. And when they're gone, we're going to have, IT people and insurance salesmen, which is fine. But that the culture of the neighborhood, the richness of having people of so many diverse backgrounds, and with such skill and such precision and such an integrity of what they do and bringing such beautiful things to the world, when it's gone for the neighborhood, we can never replace that. It's gone for the culture. Yes, we could buy something beautiful from overseas, but it's really not the same. And there's another thing about producing, for example, producing lacquer overseas. If the sap all comes from overseas and something happens to that market, Japan would not be able to produce lacquer anymore, produce lacquer goods anymore. So, to have at least partial self-reliance would be a very positive thing, I believe.
Yeah. I think that really speaks to, yes. I think that's a really interesting issue, and it speaks to some of the issues that have happened historically. And what I've come in contact with is we do have craftspersons who create the kind of pigment that I use to paint with. And the technique is such that, and because it's so expensive and they want to preserve that technique that's been, developed over hundreds of years, they keep it a secret. And it's protected in such a way that they don't even leave any records behind. It's all kutizutae. It's all spoken only. And because of that, it means that when the last person dies out and they have no one to carry on the lineage, then that pigment is gone, and we'll never know how it was made or how to use it. And so there was the history and the tradition has been great in protecting that. You see, say, Maisen taking over the porcelain production in Europe instead of importing it from Japan. Maisen kind of took over because they were able to develop similar techniques. And so you can understand why people actually protected those techniques with their lives. And when you visit Imaricho in Kyushu, you'll see the graves of the people who protected those techniques with their lives and honored as the patron saints of the porcelain community. So that is important, and we can understand why we want to have Japan have autonomy, self-reliance with urushi and other things like that. And yet at the same time, you have a real weakness as well, like with the weavers and the dyers, where one link in the chain can be the biggest weakness in the whole group. And certainly that was the situation for us in nihonga, when the animal protein that's used to bind the pigment to make our paint, when the final production went out of business, the final group of people that produced this protein binder went out of business, we couldn't do anything at all, because it didn't matter how many pigments, different colors and things like that we had. The binder, which held everything together, when that's gone, we're out of luck. And so luckily, a corporation, gelatin food production corporation, stepped in and helped out with that. But that gave us a great, nightmares for a good long time, wondering, what would happen. And so I think being able to open enough so that you can have cooperation, you're not always protecting those, family secrets, so that you can have cooperation throughout, your peers, means that it won't be lost, while at the same time protecting it enough so that you're not worrying about losing it to competitors, things like that. It's a delicate balance, I think.
Yeah, it sounds very much like it's a delicate balance, and it sounds like people have identified 2 or 3 things that are kind of going on simultaneously. There's a bit of a call for where Japan's exquisite, complicated crafts have historically involved so many steps to be produced. There's a bit of a call to streamline and possibly merge or eliminate certain steps that maybe are not as essential as people might have seen them as in the past, and at the same time do more to ensure that knowledge of these things is preserved in some manner. And part of that, it sounds like people are describing, some people are very carefully protective of their knowledge and aren't sharing it even to ensure that it's preserved to the next generation. And in some cases, it's the opposite, that the next generation seems not to be interested in even knowing about these processes. So we're faced with people who want to know that can't get the information, and people who just really don't care and are not interested to have the information, and the information dies out. So we've got these kind of mujun, oxymoronic situation going on. What do you guys feel about this? What do you say to this?
I think also it's an appreciation that you want young people to understand and to learn about it, but I don't think it's highly regarded in many circles. There are other more important things in Japanese society that they're concerned about, and they're blind, very blind to the beauty of what's behind.
So is it perhaps also just
and the whole fabric of society that has been built on crafts? And I think most people are not aware of that, and I don't know how you can increase that awareness.
So we have the fast pace of the 21st century.
Yeah.
Everything just goes so much faster that taking the time to produce these crafts in the traditional painstaking way, which is what of course gives them their quality, seems no one wants to take that amount of time anymore, or no longer values time in the same way. Steve, you're cracking your neck to add to this. Well, Sachiko, do you have something you would like to add?
I think the mass production and mass consumption made it really difficult to see the process of things that's being made. You have everything in here with all the function, and you don't know how it's made and who are involved. And now we are in a project in my region called Keihoku, which is in the north of Kyoto City. The project is called Fab Village Keihoku, and we are building a place in this region of forestry. The Keihoku is a very old forestry region. And this place called Fab Village Keihoku is supposed to be a place to be open to to open to the public, so that everyone can experience the process of making. Everyone can feel, making it. It's a place where people can acquire, the sense of making.
That's great.
And there are people. So I think the point that you're making is that there are still people out there who do have an appreciation for these complex methods.
Yeah, that's what we are aiming.
Although
yes.
perhaps they might be somewhat rare. Steve?
I've in the process of working with the contest and also with our school for carpenters and plasterers and other fields, I've been seeing a real interest on the part of young people in entering crafts. And I've heard from many people, many craftspeople who have young people coming to them constantly asking for work, asking to become an apprentice, asking to learn the process. And they're refused not because it's not a reasonable and wonderful thing to do, but because the craftsman himself or herself doesn't have the work that could support an apprentice. So they're turning people away. In our carpentry school, we just trained the first 6 young carpenters. We're just certifying them as master joinery carpenters. No one has done this in decades. There are no young people that can do this work. And now we have 6 young people, and all 6 of those people were hungry to be traditional craft carpenters. And there was no place they could do that because, in order to learn that on the job, it would probably take 10 or 15 years by the time their company, the people they work for, had that kind of a job which will allow them to learn. But in a concentrated setting, we were able to teach that. All these 6 people consider a carpenter to be extraordinarily, the word in Japanese is kakkui, or super cool. And and there are a number of young people that see tradespeople as kakkui, as super cool. And I think this really, as Allan says, that it's really changing.
Bravo, Steve. That's amazing. Really tremendous. Didn't you say they built a matsuyama?
So in Kyoto, we have, as many of you know, we have the traditional townsman houses, these wooden houses. And 60 years ago, there were 100,000 of them. And now there are 40,000 of them.
Wow.
They're tearing them down right and left. And no one has built a traditional and an authentic matsuyama in 85 years. And our group of carpenters now is building the first one in 85 years. We have a buyer, and we're going to start construction soon. So interesting, I was speaking with Sachiko-san's partner, Tsusumi-san, and when I told him what we were doing, he just lit up like a Christmas tree. He was so excited that the wood that came from your district is what built the original city of Kyoto. And he was just saying, let's rebuild Kyoto with the same forest, not using imported lumber, but let's use the lumber in our own forests and have healthy forests again. So that was a very exciting moment when I spoke with him.
But at the same time, I think, Sachiko's made a good point that in the modern society, we've become accustomed to the lower quality level of mass production, and many people are satisfied with that and seem to have lost the ability to appreciate the higher quality that comes out of the attention to detail that our traditional craft traditional craft tradition gives us. And so what can we do to reinstate people's appreciation of that high quality? Because without that appreciation, they really won't mind if traditional crafts die out. How do we get people to understand that level of quality? Does anyone have any ideas on that?
That's yours, Sachiko-san.
I think it's all about education, and it has to be started like when and people are very young. And nowadays we are so used to be intimate with all the plastic things, and people say that they don't see the difference between plastic and urushi ware. But if you keep touching it, you don't know why, but you know. And that has to be cultivated, taking long time, and it has to be started very early.
That's an interesting idea. These things begin at home.
I think it's all about education, because people have forgotten. And one thing that we're doing in Japan Craft 21 is we are introducing beautiful works of craft to the world every day. And we're using social media because this seems to be a central force for a lot of people. So we're introducing every day 2 extraordinary crafts, and our Facebook account is exploding with interest. And not only are these foreign people who had never seen so many exquisite crafts one after another every day, but many Japanese people, at least half of our members are Japanese, and many people have forgotten how extraordinary the Japanese crafts are.
That's right.
So, and another thing is with our, click and buy society, all of our local stores are disappearing, and large chain stores are taking over, and it's those neighborhood stores that kept our neighborhoods together, and where many of these crafts were available, just daily use crafts, just things for our kitchens. Not that the large stores don't sell those, but I think any movement that we can at least in part support our local shops in our neighborhoods would go a long way to increase this appreciation for things that we hold, tactile things.
Yeah, the tactile aspect of it. Please, Alan, did you have something you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I think that was really an issue for my own work. I think that especially as you see various untried mediums like giclée prints that are essentially just computer printouts that are put in a frame, and things like that, where the customer just doesn't know. And it got really frustrating when I had an exhibition and I heard, they said, you must be there to help us sell the artwork. And when I went there, I realized how important that was. They said, just sit in the corner, be quiet, and we'll talk to the client and we'll take you out whenever we need you. And I was listening to them talk about, oh yeah, he's a French guy, and these are oil paints. And I just had to come out and say, look, no, that's not the case. And what I ended up doing as when the bubble burst in the 90s, and all of these galleries went out of business, I had to, open up my studio to be a showroom. I don't like to call it a gallery because it seems too, high pressure for most patrons. But I found that the people, exactly like, Steve was talking about the community, Matsuyama-san talks about the community trying to create a place where people can come and see what's done, how it's made, and experience that. I found in my own experience, when people could come and visit my studio, look at the tools, watch me actually painting and creating the paint and laying the gold leaf and all of those things, they had a different understanding and appreciation for the work because they could see what the materials were like. I let them handle the materials, things like that, and ask questions and feel like that was, they had a direct experience that you wouldn't have in a gallery where there's somebody else that's, may or may not understand the situation. So I definitely agree with that as being an important way to take care of that problem.
Well, and that again poses a very difficult challenge for the 21st century, whereas we've already observed so many people have become accustomed to making their purchases online and to making their decision based on photographs, and albeit often a 3D view of something, but still just a photograph. And I can think of many times when I've been in shops here in Japan, and it is the fact that I've touched something and it speaks to me by the way it feels that makes me want to purchase that object. I wouldn't have bought it if I'd merely been looking at it on a screen. So what do we have any ideas of how we can overcome the fact that nowadays we are interacting with so much of our world through a screen? How do we convince somebody in that situation of the value of these objects? Any takers?
Well, it's a hard one. I think it used to be that Japanese villages and towns all made and lived with crafts. It was very much a integral part of life. And the only place I see that now, I think, is Okinawa, where you can go to someone's house and that's Omine-san's and that's Saito-san's, and who's made the thing. And these are not exquisite, extraordinary crafts. These are just everyday, ordinary crafts that people live with. And they're homono. They're something that's made by hand. And we've all experienced that we know it. But when you get it online or anything, you have no idea of the touch or the feel or anything else. So I don't know. Your village sounds like a wonderful start.
Absolutely.
I don't feel it happening in Tokyo, but I think we need some of your energy to spread over to Tokyo so that people can feel what it is to use the homono. The homono we've lost track of.
Yeah, I think there is one place in Tokyo that I've seen that does do that, and it's a really beautiful store called Blue and White. You may have heard of it.
Arigatou gozaimasu.
The other great thing is you display it in such a way where you feel like you're living with it. The way that there's a kind of a living environment in the store that gives you a sense of context that I like as well.
Thank you. It is contagious. I think when people realize the beauty of these things and the utility, because they're made to be used, many of them, and once they start using them, then they don't go back to the Mickey Mouse plastic.
So true.
That's right.
I experienced something really interesting, and it happened over and over and over during a 30-year period, where I would take people take a group of Westerners to a town, and there would be a shop or a government store, a shop, and they would be selling crafts, and there would be a very well-produced video where people could watch how it's made, and people would just walk through and maybe buy one or two things. But then I tried to always follow that up with a visit to an actual craft person. Our visits were not set up for sales. It was cultural exchange. But invariably, when people saw how it was made live, they spoke with the craftsperson and they got that person's energy. They would just clean out the shop. And we're not speaking about necessarily expensive works. There could be just things, things for functional work for kitchens and for gardening and things like that. But people just fell in love with the person who made the object. Right. And it's that contact that's really hard to duplicate that online.
Online, yeah, it is. We have one question in the room, if you want to come up to the microphone. And I've been following the questions and comments on the chat as well. I've tried to incorporate those into the discussion as much as I can. I think there's one I still haven't quite got to yet, but I promise I will. Anthony has one as well? Okay.
My name is Kurt Sieber. I'm an associate member here of the club. Just to put things in context, I'm in Japan since 1960, so that's quite a long time, and I have been following this personally, what you have mentioned, and this is totally correct. I mean, I have nothing to add to that even. I have one very important point to add, which is that in the past 30 years, the gap between rich people and normal Japanese people has become much too large. And it's very simple. People are forced to buy the cheapest thing because they just can't afford these very nicely done craft work. So unless and I come with a second question or comment later on, unless that problem is solved, and finally Japan, not only for the craft, but Japan as a whole, has to increase the income of the people to get things working again. Thank you.
Anthony, do you
Anthony Rowley, I'm a journalist and writer. Before I ask my questions, I wonder if I could please suggest that the panelists speak a little closer to your microphones, if you don't mind it. Okay, it seems extraordinary to me that this situation exists in Japan. I mean, Japan has traditionally been so proud of its crafts, whether it's sword making or ceramics or whatever. So how has this situation come about that these crafts are so neglected? And how much support do you get from the central government or the regional governments to promote these crafts? I mean, until the pandemic struck, Japan had a fantastic boom in tourism. And, you know, a lot of the urban, rural areas were where people headed for. So how much did that increase interest in these crafts? And what potential is there in the future for, you know, for interesting tourists in these crafts? And finally, what is the export potential of these craft-made objects? Thank you. Sorry, rather lots of questions, but addressed to all the panelists.
Thank you. Actually, those are all on my list as well, so you're saving me lots of trouble there. Please, panelists, go for it.
Okay,
it's
you're in
been-
retail, so
Excuse me?
you're in retail, so
Yeah, it's been quite disastrous, to be honest, because the foreign market, the visitors to Japan are the ones that Steve's talking about too, who come and see the beautiful things that have been made and the energy that has gone into them, and they fall in love with it. Without that actual encounter, it's very hard. It's very hard to do it over the internet, and the enthusiasm that foreigners bring to Japan has been a revitalizing force for Japan. And we're all feeling like the balloon that's lost its helium. And so we have to pump up Japanese enthusiasm, that's for sure, and pump up Japanese pride in what they're producing. But we also have to get rid of this COVID and encourage people to come back to Japan and continue to show what Japan is producing, because it's a very, very difficult situation without the international guests and customers.
Sachiko, did you have anything you want to add to that?
Maybe later.
Maybe later. Fair enough. Steve?
you know, I've noticed, you know, living in Kyoto and being in the tour business, Kyoto being a huge magnet for tourism, I've noticed that with this huge influx of tourists, the level of depth seems to have gotten much more shallow. It's people just passing through very quickly, and the things that they're purchasing, it's a level of craft which is, very beautiful, but it's, rather than buying a basket which really expresses the skill level and the culture and the history, they may buy a pair of earrings, which is okay, but it's more of a superficial purchase, and I don't find that they're getting to the heart of the real craft culture. It's just going very quickly, and a huge market is a huge market are just people coming from Asia to buy cheap shampoo, let's say very good shampoos and things like that in drugstores. So it's like a huge market of people with suitcases going up and down the street buying, consumer goods, which is great for this society, but they're not. I don't think they're spending too much on Japanese crafts. And in terms of export, it's amazing how little is being exported. The extraordinary crafts of Japan, and again, it's education. With urushi, urushi is probably the most arduous craft in the world to be able to make a simple bowl for soup. You look at it, and most foreigners look at this, or even some Japanese. It's just a coating on there. They knew that this is 10 to 12 coats of applying and sanding and removing and applying and removing and applying and removing, and the whole aspect of the final coat having to be absolutely dust free, and it's a 3-month process. When you look at that piece, it's like it's a jewel. But most people don't get that. They say, oh, this is 1,000 yen and this is 10,000 yen. I'm going to buy the one that's 1,000 yen. Of course, it's not made of wood. It's made from reconstituted sawdust, and it's not. And it's maybe made on a conveyor belt, and it's dried in a machine in a dryer, and it's not going to last long. But it's 1,000 yen as opposed to 10,000 yen. So it's the education.
Just very quickly, if I may, is government recognising this problem? Are you getting support?
Sorry, just to repeat into the microphone then for the people online. Anthony is asking about government and the extent to which government has been involved in helping to preserve these very important crafts. If I can just add to that, I'm aware that Japan has a long-standing tradition of the living national treasures who are often craft artisans, highly prized people in their fields. But is it enough, or do you think there's more that the government should be doing to ensure that these things that are so intrinsic to the culture are not lost?
I think the schools should teach. Sorry, I think that schools should teach more about the magnificence of what is produced in Japan. I think at one point, Japanese things were disproven. They didn't have any use for anything but things from abroad, and I think that thinking is still there. And how to reverse it, I don't know. You want the Japanese pride to be in the right places, which is in the craftsmanship and in the incredible tradition of handmade things that Japan has. And I don't know. I don't think it's taught in the schools. I don't think children appreciate it.
Or not nearly enough.
Yeah. Not enough.
Yeah.
Right.
Certainly that's the case with nihonga, and I'm sorry, I keep piping in when it comes to nihonga, but
Well, you're the man, so.
thank you. It's very interesting. You see, only within the last 10 years has the education system required students to learn on Japanese musical instruments during music time. So it wasn't just, saxophone and violin. You also had to do the Katoh and the shamisen, things like that. With art education in the public school system, it's still only Western style art. That they will, in your textbook, you'll have, Hasegawa Tohaku and Kano Eitoku to look at. But there's no study of the materials and the techniques and things like that. And I think that's a really big problem, a big issue that needs to be solved. Absolutely. So I agree, education is important. And I noticed in the comments, Kiyomi Koike made the same, mentioned that as well. And so I'm actually kind of taking her her comment and running with it. Thank you, Kiyomi-san.
I'm curious
May
that if
I
you
ask you a small question?
Sure.
Is that a paintbrush you have in your hand?
This is a pencil. I usually always have I always write with the paintbrush, but
Is that a tool
not
of your
this time.
trade?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Good,
Yeah,
good. I
so-
like that.
Yeah, you know a yatate. You know what a yatate is? So the tube part carries the brush, and then there's a little pocket thing that has the ink well in it, and yeah. So I always carry that in my pocket.
Very clever.
I like to
Did you
see
have
it.
I will definitely.
Steve?
Oh, yeah. There are two things. Okay, the government does actually quite a bit with first of all with a system of recognizing craftspeople, the traditional craft designation Dento Kogeishi, which is a nationally recognized system, and also the national treasure, living national treasure system. And local governments do a lot to promote their local crafts. But obviously, whatever they're doing is not enough, because it's definitely not enough. It's not working to the extent that that would result in a true revival by any means. But there are a couple of things that I personally believe could be very, very important for the government to be involved. One would be that there are certain crafts. There are certain crafts in the ecosystem that Sachiko-san was talking about. For example, for yuzen dyers, it's very difficult to get excellent brushes nowadays. So most of the yuzen dyers I know, the yuzen kimono dyers, they rely on a whole system of tiny, beautifully made tiny brushes, and most of them are using their old brushes because they can't get new brushes. They can't get the ones really high quality brushes. There are people who do wax resist dyeing. The people who remove the wax resist from the cloth in the dye process, it's a government regulated process, so it has to be done by a professional, and there's not enough work for these people, and they're going out of business. So what I say the government could do is to support those really crucial support crafts that could not viably, there's no viable living for these people, but those are the little key points that make the whole thing run. For example, with Allan, for the binder for the pigments, they found a solution, but the government could really support those disappearing support crafts. And another thing is that there's some things that, for example, a Japanese Buddhist altar, made in Japan. It's one of the great craft products of this country, and most of them are made in Shanghai now, and which is sad, because of all the things. It's not only the lacquer, but it's not only the carving of the wood. It's the lacquer. It's the joinery. It's the gold leaf. It's the metal fittings. It's everything, and it's a community, and that's all going to China now. And so why I believe that these endangered crafts could be supported with tax protection. It's not like the government's trying to protect Toyota and their 5 million cars a day. It's just, a few hundred Buddhist altars a year could save the Buddhist altar makers of Nagoya. Could totally save that whole thing.
As moderator, I suppose it's my job to be the cynic. In my experience with the government, they prefer a one-size-fits-all, and they feel that if we're going to support one area, we have to support every area. They don't like to have to make the judgment that this one is endangered and needs attention. But at the same time, they can't justify supporting all of the stages of the process, and therefore they allow some to fall through the crack. It's an unfortunate thing that nobody wants to be the one to make those key judgment calls. And we wind up, as a consequence, with these things getting lost.
And so it takes 10 years to learn how to become a yuzen dyer. 10 years. And to make an absolute treasure, absolute treasure kimono. But in 1 year, you can make a very low level, just a very basic kimono. And so kimono makers have gone to Vietnam, and they have a 1-year training course, and 70% of the yuzen dyeing comes from Vietnam now. But it's not the kimono that were produced by grandmasters. It's just entry-level people just doing the very basic work. So it's really the skill level, the artistic ability has totally been dumbed down.
So
Can
are
I
we?
add something?
Yes, please, Sachiko.
As for urushi, government delivered a report, not a report, a notification encouraging consumption and using of Japanese urushi in 2015. And since then, a lot of regions started planting urushi and tried to produce urushi. And they started also educating urushi sapper. But as you might know, it takes 15 years to grow urushi trees. And now those urushi sappers don't have trees to tap.
Oops.
And the reason why Japanese government delivered this notification is because, not, like I said earlier, no, Steve said that, only 5% of urushi is made within Japan, and 95% is imported from China. And the Japanese government wanted to stop that, but the government encouraged that urushi is Japanese urushi is used for repairing traditional and historical properties, cultural properties.
Mm-hmm.
So it's only for reparation of things that's made in history. And can you call that culture? It's not living.
Right.
And my partner has created a surfboard with urushi and paulownia trees, paulownia wood, with a collaborator called Tom Wagner. He is American living in Australia, and he's a legend surfboard shaper who revitalized the wooden surfboard. And so he did so because he was a surfer, and he wanted to do something about urushi that's going down. And he made a movie about this production of urushi surfboard with this collaborator Tom Wagner. And this movie was screened here and there in film festival, and we won the surfboard film festival in Santiago. No, I forgot the
San
place.
Diego, perhaps?
No, I forgot. I'm sorry. But surf film festival in America. And people who saw the movie don't know anything about urushi, but they saw the movie and they found it really cool. And Japanese children also saw the movie and they found it really cool. And then we often, appear in front of the people, particularly of children, with the surfboard, urushi surfboard, and my partner Takuya looks like really ordinary but nice guy, with he is an artisan but also a surfer. So he appears quite casual to children, and children will love him, and they love the surfboard and they want to touch it. But if you look at urushi wear in the museum and the gallery, you won't be able to touch. Everything is in a glass case. You shouldn't touch them. But that's that has been creating a distance.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So we want to keep producing something touchable and usable in everyday life.
That's right.
And the gradation of the craft level is also important too. Some is made with like those like high established skilled by national human treasure, but some things can be made by yourself as well. My partner Takuya appears in front of children with a skateboard that he painted himself. He's not a painting artisan. He's a urushi material artisan. But he uses this skateboard so many years, and he repairs so many times. And you know that you can do it. Although urushi is a little tricky because it has an allergic, elements. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But if you are careful, then you might be able to use it yourself. And this kind of experience and understanding is what we want to create.
How can we see the film?
Please Google Beyond Tradition, maybe Beyond Tradition Urushi.
Beyond
can,
Tradition
yes.
Urushi. Okay,
Yes,
we'll make a
then
note
you
of
might
that.
be, you should be able to find the film.
So I think that one of the things that Koge traditional crafts has always had as its key element is that these are functional items meant to be used on a daily basis, and the joy of them is the use of them. And yet we, in our 21st century, we've substituted plastic for so many things that we don't have the same appreciation. But then, as you mentioned, with the urushi surfboards, what we're seeing now, I think, in a lot of the Koge traditional craft methodology, is younger people coming in, learning that methodology, taking the time and making that investment, and then applying it to modern items. And making
That's
it
right.
more relevant in
That's
our
right.
modern day. And I
That's a big
wonder
thing.
if each of you might care to comment on that, your own experiences or observations of that. Beyond surfboards and skateboards, what else are we seeing?
I felt that from the beginning, that the craftsmen are making beautiful, beautiful things, but they weren't relevant to everyday life. And also there was that wall around them because they're so precious. So they do have to be made in paper or whatever, in humble things, so that we humble people can use them in every day and appreciate them. And the upgrade to our lives that they bring, if we're using the real things and we're using crafts every day, is just unlimited, uncalculable, I think. So that's something that we have to keep promoting, I think, just to make them, to bring them down to daily life.
Right. Steve?
Yes, and I think we have a question after.
Okay. Sorry, I'm checking the questions online as well. I'm getting bombarded here. While Steve is talking, perhaps one of our questioners can make their way to the microphone.
I grew up in Los Angeles in the 50s and the 60s. And I don't know if maybe some of the older people know what melmac is. Melmac is it's a plastic form of dinnerware. And it comes in all colors. And I was raised on melmac and TV dinners and canned food. And I came to Japan when I was 23 years old, and my jaw dropped to the ground. It's like everything's handmade, everything is beautiful. And there are things in our daily life, how many people in Japan take a bento box lunch made out of Tupperware? Maybe I shouldn't be mentioning brands, made out of plastic. It costs maybe 500 yen or 600 yen. And it adds nothing to your soul to eat out of a piece of plastic. But for 5,000 yen, which is about roughly $45, you could buy a handmade cedar wood lunchbox, which has a fragrance of the wood, which will last you 20 years. So every day when you eat your lunch, it's a celebration of life. You're celebrating your lunch.
That's a nice way.
And you don't need to have a huge income to do that. It improves, it enriches your life. Another thing is everyone I know takes a bath every night. And how many houses have these plastic buckets for using, for washing? They're excuse the word, it's just a piece of crap. It's just totally useless. It's ugly, and it decays over time. For about 8,000 yen, either 10,000 yen, you can get a standard cedar bucket, which is absolutely beautiful. And when I have a cedar bucket, when I take a bath, every day I hold that in my hand and it adds something to my life. So that life is not just automatically going from one plastic container to the next. There are a few things, maybe people can't afford to have everything, but a few things in their life that they use every day. That this is what I encourage.
We have a question on the floor.
Thank you. Yep. Thank you so much. My name's Joan Anderson. I'm also an associate member. I was really inspired by what you said about the film, about the surfboard, and I just had a question about what role you think the media can play, because if, for example, there was a Netflix series of fascinating individuals who are making these crafts, I think that could just do so much. And personally, when I learn about the human story, I often then do go online and buy something, so I think buying online shouldn't be, of course, completely discounted. I think it's an important way of supporting people. And the second question was about the Olympics. What a tragedy that we have these hideous, plasticky mascots. I wonder if there's a last-minute sort of alternative mascot made of some wonderful craft that could be promoted online. Thank you so much.
Anyone care to comment or react?
What could the media do?
What more could the media do? I have observed that NHK World, which is one of my favorite TV channels, does feature a number of artisans and their work, and it's always quite enlightening to see those. What else have you experienced, or do you have ideas about?
It's interesting. I watch NHK too, the domestic NHK, and I've seen NHK World. They're spectacular productions, and I don't see there seems to be something, a next step after seeing something. What would be the action step that people could take? What is an easy to enter door, a portal for them to get involved in that? I've so many clients who watch NHK World religiously, and then they come to Japan and say, well, "Where can I find that? And where can I see that?" There's no connection when they come to Japan. They can't find those people. They're hidden away someplace, and so that's a frustration. I think that, and I'm asking maybe our audience, what could be a portal? What's the action step? I see it. It's beautiful. What can I do to get it, to promote it? Because it doesn't exist with the current, as far as I can see, the current system.
Put NHK
I have
on
an
the
embarrassing.
job. Maybe NHK could address that.
Well, that's a excellent. Is NHK here today?
Yeah, NHK.
No representative from NHK. We'll be sure to forward this video to them later. Alan, did you have something you wanted to add to this?
Oh, this is really embarrassing. When NHK came to my studio, after it was up and everything, I immediately on my social media put all the links up of that NHK program so that people could see it. So I guess maybe the craftspersons, the artisans, need to sort of be proactive, and once NHK does that, or anyone else does that, I guess it's sort of in our ballpark to then figure out how to use it. And obviously NHK has a lot that they can still do, but I think none of us were trained to promote ourselves. And they don't teach that in art school. At Gaydai, there's none of that. And so just being aware of the fact that we're going to have to do it ourselves is really important. I think we keep forgetting something really important when we were talking about, like, why doesn't the government do this? Or I wish NHK would do this or whatever. I think it's really interesting and exciting to see that people who see those gaps that need to be filled are coming in to fill those gaps. And I think that our ability to really show appreciation for that, those efforts and that work is really important. And I think that today, one of those things that just is not getting recognized as much as it really should be is actually Steve and the awards program that he's put together. That's only just the very first initiating the first time that the competition has happened. But this has been a year in the making, and the timing couldn't be better with COVID and everything like that. I feel like in so many ways, it answers all of the needs that are right here hitting us in the face. And I just really appreciate what you're doing. And I think that this is a real culmination of what you've been doing for decades by taking groups of people, incoming, foreigners who come to Japan, and taking their guidebooks away from them and saying, this is what you really want to be seeing. You'll be really interested at how much better this is off the beaten track when you can experience things, handle them, see them up, face to face, and talk with the craftspersons. That's just phenomenal, and it really is in every way, just like what you're talking about, the bento box, in the fact that so many of these package tour things, they're like your plastic bento box. And what you've done in sort of showing people this wonderful, ordinarily not very accessible Japan with the craftsmen and their studios and things like that, is creating that handmade bento box of an experience in coming to Japan. So I'd like to say one of the really neat things is when you have why can't I remember her name? This is what happens when you're thinking on your feet. Who takes people around Tokyo in part of your group, and she will take people Chizuko-san, thank you so much.
And Keiko-san.
Exactly, yes. And she'll take them to the National Museum, and they'll look at the artwork in the National Museum. And like you're saying, Sachiko, you're talking about being behind the glass. But then she'll bring them to my studio and be able to see the tools that were used to make the same kinds of paintings, the techniques that were done, the materials. And for them, the experience of seeing what's going on in the museum and then how it's actually done and made in the studio makes all the difference in the world. And it brings it to life. And I really appreciate the way that you've been able to put context to so many things that are kind of a cipher otherwise. I think that really needs to be, recognized and seen for all the good that it is.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Steve and I had a long conversation in preparation for this panel, and one of the things that I think Steve emphasized was that koge traditional crafts almost need to be branded and marketed as a luxury good, the same way that Cartier or Louis Vuitton, who engage significant marketing departments to do this work. We almost need that sort of a centralized marketing function on behalf of these crafts. I don't know, who, some entrepreneurial capitalist perhaps will recognize the need and launch in there to fill it, because certainly it is something where such an entrepreneur could quite thrive. Wada-san, I believe you had another question.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Yusuke Wada, associate member here. Steve-san, thank you very much for the Buddhist altar. I am in the funeral business, actually. I'm a funeral director. And Sachiko-san, I live in Chigasaki. We go surfing before work. So Urushi's surfboard is very fascinating. And my question is, well, since I'm in the Buddhist in the funeral industry, it's dying, actually. And due to the lot of things.
Intended.
And, well, yeah, we're dying to get into the business.
But you said, due to the...
Due to a lot of many situations like COVID as well, but the thing was the Buddhist altars and all that, they are the Shiraki no Saidan, which is also usually made in Kyoto. People are not using that anymore, and these Buddhist altars, as in Butsudan, they are basically made in China now to Vietnam. Then now since the Vietnamese workload is the cost is getting high, it's going to Cambodia. And those are it's much cheaper. What we see is these traditional craftsmen are really not efficiently handing down the technology from sensei to deshi.
Right.
Well, it's probably the educational system where they tell people to steal the techniques by watching, where actually, 技術は見て盗め. So what do you have to say about that? That people are not, there are much more efficient ways of teaching the new young deshi to these craftsmen.
Does it really need
Thank you.
That's a
years?
huge, that's an extraordinary point. It's so central. Traditionally it takes 10 years to learn, the term in Japanese is minarai. You watch and you copy and you do, you copy and you do. And on one hand, the minarai system has created a culture of probably a level of craftsmanship that is almost unknown anywhere in the world. The level of the level of craftsmanship for a person to go trial and error for 10 years, they become a super person, craftsperson. However, in the 21st century, it just doesn't work. I know of a very, very well-known and successful weaver in Kyoto who abandoned that system, and now he teaches a 2 to 3 year course where he sits there with his protege and he says, do this, do this, do this, and it takes 3 years, and that person can weave some of the national treasure level works now. But it's a very intense program. Of course, that person will never be the same as a person who had the 10-year training, but that the craft now is saved. At least his particular kind of weaving is saved through that method. So that's why when we teach carpentry, in a year and a half, a carpenter can go from just a conventional carpenter to a master joinery master in a year and a half because of that way of teaching. And I think if we don't do that, no one is going to invest in 10 years of training anymore, either the teacher or the student.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Traditionally, they would have lived with the master, and the master would have, give them a place to live and fed them and all that, which is difficult from the master's point of view to be able to do. But then, of course, that kind of proximity does help a lot with the learning aspect. But I think it's kind of awkward. You don't really have your own, your own life, your own privacy when that happens. And I think contemporary culture finds that a little bit too onerous.
Yeah. So times have changed, and I think I hear people saying that as much as we want to preserve these traditional crafts in their splendor, some modifications or adjustments need to be made for the times so that they can continue, but in a perhaps more efficient, if I can put it that way, style. I see that we have just 5 minutes left, and I'd like to ask the speakers, because I still have half a dozen questions, and I think there were 1 or 2 online that I didn't get a chance to actually pose. But I'd like to give each speaker a chance to kind of give us their final message, the things that you really wanted to get across today that we haven't yet had a chance to touch on. So maybe, Steve, we'll start with you this time.
Okay, I'll be brief.
You don't have to be. You got a minute and a half at least.
A minute and a half. Okay. There are many challenges, as we know. There are many challenges in the world of crafts in Japan. However, I've looked at every challenge, and I've looked at every possible cause, and there are a number of really interesting strategies that could be applied in each case. Some it may be a bit of trial and error, but I think if there's a will to preserve, not only to preserve the crafts, but to create a golden age of crafts, there's no reason why we can't do that. We still have enough extraordinary talent here to be the foundation of a golden age of crafts. And there are plenty of people interested, and there are plenty of people out there that are interested in purchasing, maybe a combination of education, marketing, and collaboration could be the keys. But I'm very, very hopeful. I'm very optimistic. After reading 154 applications and interviewing all these craftspeople, and seeing the spark in their eyes of I want to make it, men and women, young people, I want to make it, I want to do something, I want to preserve, I want to revitalize my craft for the 21st century. And so I'm very optimistic.
Hear, hear.
Bravo. Sachiko.
That's good.
Yes. Here I just wanted to leave the last message that I would like people to understand this matter of sustainability of the craft as a social matter and a communal matter. It's not just a collection of individual efforts. It's a matter of ecosystem. That of course it has to be adapted and adjusted in the current system. But I think any one of us can contribute to be a part of this ecosystem.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
I think there's nothing more joyful to do than to be able to do that, to spread your golden age and to encourage people to take part in this. And if we all join hands, I think it can happen. I mean, that's what we've been trying to do.
It's happening.
Yeah. We're behind you, Steve. And Sachiko-san, too.
And
And
you
Alan,
too,
your eyes are sparkling like no one else's.
And we're behind you, Alan.
Where
We're
are you,
behind you,
Alan?
Amy.
Alan's gone
Thank you so
away.
much.
Oh no! As soon as he speaks,
yeah.
we'll see him again.
There you
Yes.
are.
There, yeah. Is it my chance?
It is.
Every time.
Please.
Okay. I think that there's one issue that I would really like to. Oops, my time is up. Cinderella is going to have to leave. But my feeling about why this is really important and what is so different from crafts that we see abroad can be seen in a legend that I just love, and to me has all the elements of what motivates me as well. And the legend is the origin of the arts in Japan. And how the legend begins is mankind, we all lived in a village, and we were all, we all did our things. And after our work was done in the evening, we'd meet in the village square, and the gods lived with us and taught us how to live peacefully, how to work sustainably with the earth, and how to farm and love each other, and the mankind and the gods, we learned everything we needed to know that was essential and important at that time. And then they said, I'm sorry, we have an important thing we have to do, and we're going to have to go back up into heaven, and but we'll be back. And they left, and thinking that the gods would return very soon, they waited in the village square, and they, meaning we, all of us, mankind. And then the next day came, and they didn't return. And on the third day, we all thought, oh, this is a problem. We're going to start forgetting all the wonderful things we were taught. We're going to have to do something to fix that in our memories. And that was the beginning of storytelling. We put that to music, and that was song, painting and drama and music, and all of these things came out of this desire to remember these important teachings. Of course, koge, you had the utsuwa, the containers. They were part of, for offerings and things like that. And so craftspersons, artists of all sorts in Japan have this very important history of remembering important information, and a kind of a mandate from our ancestors to preserve that in our work. And so not only is it just about utility, but there's a deeper sort of a spiritual and essential part of being a human being kind of element to what we all do. And for me, that's the biggest difference, and something that I hope that we won't forget, and that as we take this to the next level, create this golden age, I hope that part of it will also be essential to the culture that we carry on.
Beautiful.
So the joy that we all get from handling these koge items truly is a religious experience. That's very profound. Thank you very much for that. All right. Well, we're at our time. I would like to once again thank all of our guests, and we have for our guests a 1-year honorary membership to our club. So we hope that for those of you who are based in Kyoto, you will make the club your home away from home. Come and have a meal with us, or come to some of our events from time to time. And Amy, we certainly hope to see you often. Alan, thank you very much. Your honorary membership will be in the mail, I promise, and we hope to see you here too. So if we can all thank our speakers, and I thank everyone for joining us online as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
We are officially adjourned.